Hello, this is Joe, Vexarace Reporter. I am going to do this podcast over again because um, technical difficulties. Newsmax finance inflation soars 5.4%, biggest jump since 2008. Prices paid, and this is July 13th, 2021 of the article. Prices paid by U.S. consumers surged in June by the most since 2008, topping all forecasts and showing higher costs associated with the economy reopening continue to fuel inflationary pressures. The Consumer Price Index jumped 0.9% in June and 5.4% from the same month last year. According to Labor Department data released Tuesday, excluding the volatile food and energy components, the so-called core CPI also rose 0.9%. The core increased 4.5% from June 2020, the largest advance since November 1991. Used vehicles accounted for 1/3 of the gain in the CPI last month. The agency said the outsize increase in the June CPI was also driven in large part by the pricing rebound in categories associated with a broader reopening of the economy, including hotel stays, car rentals, apparel, and affairs. They are increasing due to COVID and reopening and stuff like that. Expectations that those increases will normalize will help explain the Federal Reserve's view that inflation is transitory. With inflation from Fed, we are told that the story is transitory, but the increases are going faster and for longer. John Riding, Chief Economic Advisor at Breen Capital, said on Bloomberg Television, "We just had a monthly increase that was about double what was expected." That's not good. The median forecasts in the Bloomberg survey of economists called for a 0.5% gain in the overall CPI from the prior month and a 4.9% year-over-year increase. Treasury yields climbed following the data, while the dollar jumped and S&P 500 futures fell. The year-over-year figures have shown outsized gains in recent months, partly because of so-called base effects. CPI retreated from March through May of last year during the pandemic lockdowns, while the annual figures are expected to peak. It is not yet clear how much moderation, will occur over the coming months. feeding through. Household spending on merchandise, fueled in part by government stimulus, has left businesses scrambling to fill orders while facing shortages of materials and labor. The dynamic is contributing to higher costs, which often feed through to consumer prices. We just say this. When you have shortages and deliveries and everything else, prices go up. And since it's going up since 2008, you got to be more conservative and cut. But when you can't cut, you spend. And this is what's going on. And people are becoming conservative of how they are spending their money, because they don't have a lot of it at this time. Or they're spending about $6.50 on a drink from Starbucks that would normally be $5, and you're wondering why. This is why. They have shortages there at Starbucks. Meanwhile, the lifting of pandemic restrictions is propelling purchases of services like travel and transportation, another contributor to inflationary pressures. Prices paid for new and used vehicles rose from a month earlier by the most on record. That said, those categories each make up less than 4% of the overall CPI. The cost of food away from home jumped 0.7% on a month-over-month basis, the largest gain since 1981. And it's expensive because something like soup, that would have been $1 or more or less, is now I should say $3 or $4 for one can. Even the oodles and noodles cup of noodles is $2, when before it would have been $1. The cost of food away from I said that. Fed Chair Jerome Powell has said the recent price increases the result of transitory reopening effects. Through more recently acknowledged the possibility of longer-term inflationary pressures, sustained constraints in production pipeline raise the risk of an acceleration in consumer inflation. Basically, if you don't have gas goes up, everything goes up. Unless you have electric, and I don't know how many people are based on Tesla. They have their own problems right now. Bottlenecks, hiring difficulties, and other constraints could continue and limit how quickly supply can adjust, raising the possibility that inflation could turn out to be higher and more persistent than we expect. A daunting prelude to what can happen in the future. Powell said after the June Federal Open Market Committee meeting, economists have been watching to see whether price pressures broaden out to categories other than those that are just now rebounding after pandemic related lockdowns. It's one thing to be locked down, but it's another thing to financially recover after a lockdown. It's what many people are going through right now. Shelter costs, which are seen as more structural component of the CPI and make up a third of the overall index, rose 0.5% last month, the most since October 2005. The gain was driven by 7.9% jump in hotel stays. Many people are getting away more this time than last year, especially even the other years, because of the potential end of a pandemic. That's still going on. Wage growth rose steadily through the second quarter, but higher consumer prices are taking a toll. Inflation adjusted average hourly earnings fell 1.7% in June after slumping 2.9% a month earlier. Separate data showed Thursday. If you are listening to this on Patreon, it's Thursday. If you are, or last week, if you are listening to this, or this month, I should say, if you're listening to this on Spreaker, it is sometime in September, depending on when you're listening to this. But it's June of 2021. Figures out Tuesday from the National Federation of Independent Business showed 47% of small business owners, the largest share since 1981, reported higher selling prices in June. They are doing better because they don't fall under the umbrella of the corporation of a McDonald's or a Starbucks or any fast food or whatever, because when they're under that, they have restrictions and, they have to, they couldn't get people in the store right away as they wanted to, and there's problems with that when small businesses were able to do that, and they're fortunate. But everyone hurt. Now they're opening up, so they're starting to do better, and they're in their element. Before they weren't, and they had to, come up with plans on how to increase. And if they didn't have outdoor seating, I don't know what they would have done. And this is for restaurants. Consumers are anticipating higher prices in the near term. Median inflation expectations for the coming year increase to series high 4.8% in June, according to the New York Fed's survey of consumer expectations. And the copyright of that is 2021, Bloomberg News, all rights reserved. Yes, we do have inflation problems, and spending is going to go down. Prices are going up, which means people will buy it first, but then people won't buy, and people will buy too much of one thing that isn't being produced. Much of. Kind of like when toilet paper went out, and and then you need to be rationed. So it's applying your resources in what needs to be done and where it needs to go. What people are buying, and they do take surveys of this, and they need to develop more of it, and allocate the working of what needs to be done. When people aren't buying this, they could buy this. That's what's needed. And amongst other things, people are learning and recouping of what life is again, and on a podcast I'm going to do on history, I'm going to discuss phases of history and how they overcame it. Hold on one second. Excuse me. I don't know where I left off, but it's just inflation is a daunting thing, and to come back from it, people are spending less, and then it's like the allocation of items, and that's what is going on right now. Let me get to the plugs. I'm gonna plug EJE Sports Cards. Recommend that Joseph Vivaldi or the Joseph Vivaldi Network sent you, and maybe we will get a cut. Maybe you will get a discount too. So they buy, they sell, and it could be eBay, it could be anything, but they'll buy. Also, I want to plug the Joseph Vivaldi Network. We're on Patreon. Check out the Patreon page. Please subscribe. Please support us. Check out the Joseph Vivaldi Network blog.com or .blogspot.com. Or www.patreon.com/the Joseph Vivaldi Network. We do podcasting, and we're gonna start filling up the blogs, and we'll see what goes on from there. Check out the Joe's Writers Club, and check out books by Richard Andrew Olkus on Kindle, and what can I say? If I say something, check out Soul Warrior's Journey, narrated by Andrew Garrett. If you hear that in the background, that's a dog barking, that's the next door neighbor. I guess that is the dog being enthusiastic over this podcast or impression. I don't know. Have a good night. This has been News